Hi, I'm Don from DonDronesOn, and welcome to my monthly Starlink Experience Report. For me, July marks month 16 of using Starlink. Speed is down even more this month, which is concerning, and it continues the recent trend. So we're going to look at some data to see if congestion may be the issue. Let's get into it. Before we get into the speed issue, a quick update on the 12 gig battle I discussed in my June Starlink report. To recap, a large mobile phone company in the US wants to use the 12 gig radio band to increase their terrestrial mobile phone coverage. And SpaceX has stated that this will massively interfere with satellite communications using the same radio spectrum, essentially killing Starlink in some regions of the US if this goes ahead. In late June, Starlink messaged their US customers to petition the FCC to reject the proposal. Apparently more than 90,000 people responded, flooding the FCC regulatory website. If you aren't clear on the impact of this proposal, please watch my June Starlink report. And if you're in the US, I urge you to submit your opinion to the FCC if you haven't already done so. Well, many of us are not in the US and not directly impacted by this particular battle. A successful blockage of this kind of, tech warfare may help prevent a similar conflict in other countries. Let's hope so. All right, let's get into my performance metrics. First up is dropout events per hour. I define a dropout as an outage over 11 seconds. Enough to be noticeable on an MS Teams or Zoom call, but typically having no impact at all on streaming services like YouTube or Netflix. Streaming services utilize buffering to basically bridge any short gaps in data transmission. In a real-time conversation, however, only very short outages can be successfully bridged. My dropout events in July were a bit better than June, but still pretty bad. 0.74 events per hour meant that I had a short dropout in nearly every virtual meeting I participated in. My colleagues are now fully used to me disappearing occasionally, only to reappear singing the "Tell Me When I'm Back" song, which is pretty sad. These outages typically last a few seconds. Annoying for sure, but still much better than the same time last year when I was having nearly 4 dropouts per hour and had to resort to my cell phone for MS Teams audio. I haven't gone back to that workaround again this summer, but nor have I yet moved my dish to attempt to dodge my tree obstructions. I'm just way too busy right now. My second metric is total outage minutes per day and shows a slightly different story, with the total outage time in July being worse than June, 7.3 minutes per day versus 5.4. Part of this is attributable to all the severe storms that keep sweeping through Ontario. This brown chunk up on the graph here represents that. When there's a really bad storm, I now fully expect to lose internet for at least part of the time. By the way, I did not include in my metrics an 8-hour electrical power outage we had on July 23rd. Is the world just falling apart? Anyways, between these two metrics, we can conclude that Starlink has made no obvious changes to their obstruction avoidance software, so I'm still getting obstacle outages due to my beloved trees. But at least there are fewer longer dropouts. And again, I think if the software was a bit more clever to avoid even attempting connections to satellites in areas like this, I would have fewer outages. There are typically 6 or more satellites available for connection, so why keep peering through the leaves when there's lots of clear sky? Or just let me block off sections of my satellite sky view manually. I'm sure I'm not the only one with this kind of problem, and solving it would be a tremendous step forward. Next, let's look at speed and latency. Download speed continues to deteriorate this month, now 65 megabits per second on average, down from a peak of 149 megabits per second. Average! That was average that I was measuring in October of 2021. That's quite a big drop. But again, 65 megabits per second is plenty of bandwidth, at least for my needs, keeping in mind that streaming a 4K movie requires only 25, and I was getting 2.5 megabits per second, 2.5 before Starlink. So yeah, it's more than enough, but worrisome that it continues to drop month by month. Upload speed actually recovered a bit at 8.8 megabits per second versus 7 last month. That's good news. Latency took a hit, however, with an average of 61 milliseconds, up almost 30% over the good old days a few months back. For me, no impact, but if I was a gamer, I would not be happy. So the average download speed was 65, but when I plot my speed tests on a histogram, a worse story emerges. Here we see the vast majority of my tests are on the slow end of the scale. My lowest speed measured was in fact 9, and I had only a few really high scores, with the fastest being 206. Going to the Starlink support site, they still say that we should expect to see download speeds between 50 to 250 megabits per second. But in my case, 46% of the 80 tests I ran in July came in below 50 megs. And looking at the last 4 months, it's pretty clear that more and more of my experience is below the expected level. So yeah, I really do want this to improve. My upload speed histogram is much more positive, with a clear peak in the 5 to 10 megabit per second range. And this is similar to the last few months. I'm okay with that. By the way, someone mentioned that they felt their speeds were worse in the evening than during the day. So I did some slicing and dicing on my metrics, and the data confirms this observation. On this chart, morning tests are over here, afternoon in the middle, and measurements made after 6 p.m. are over here. Upload speeds, the ones in orange, and the ping measurements in gray, don't seem to vary too much across the day, but there's a clear deterioration of download speeds in the evening hours, averaging 81 megabits per second in the morning, but only 43 in the evening, almost half. This points directly to congestion issues somewhere in either the satellite link or the Starlink ground stations, and has nothing to do with my own setup or usage patterns. The Starlink support webpage even acknowledges this potential issue, saying, peak hours are the times during the day when many Starlink users are trying to use their service at the same time, typically between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. local time. Blah, blah, blah. You may experience varying or slower speeds during these times. But why are we getting congestion at all? They seem to be tossing new satellites into orbit every second day, so surely things should be getting better. Well, time to do some math on the back of the old napkin. Starting with the number of satellites, there are now 2,201 in service as of July 28th, with many more being maneuvered into the constellation every day. So let's pop this into Excel. Okay, so here's the same line of in-service satellites in red, measured on the right-hand axis on this graph. But the number of subscribers is growing much faster, as shown by this blue line, measured on the left-hand axis. There are now almost 500,000 Starlink users worldwide, which is pretty incredible. When I got my dish in March of 2021, there were only about 20,000 of us. Now, when you divide the number of subscribers by the number of satellites, you get this orange line. A year ago, there were only 70 users per satellite on average. And yes, I realize the distribution from region to region isn't equal, but this gives us a number to play with. So now in July, we have 227 subscribers per satellite, almost 3 times as many. But should this really be a problem? Apparently each of the current satellites has a bandwidth of 20 gigabits per second, which sounds like tons. But this works out to 88 megabits per second of bandwidth per subscriber at a very gross average level. And that means that yes, we are very likely hitting capacity limits on some heavily hit satellites in peak usage times. And it will likely get worse before it gets better. More satellites will obviously help, as will the larger capacity version 2 satellites eventually. But those smart boys and girls at Starlink had better figure out some clever load balancing algorithms or something in the meantime before things turn ugly. Well, there we have it, my July 2022 Starlink report. performance continuing to degrade, although I'm still thrilled to get this kind of bandwidth at my rural location. I hope you found this video interesting. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for my future videos. And there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description if you'd like to support my channel that way. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.